Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, April 17th, 2017. A couple of 17s there. Time to head out and pick up a lottery ticket, I assume. For those of you not taking off today, Canadians enjoying Easter Monday. I notice according to my calendar today. It's Easter Monday for everybody, but I don't know why that's designated a Canada thing. Do you guys take off from work on Monday today? For that? I don't know. Let me know. I guess you got plenty of time to do it. You layabout bastards. All right. Speaking of layabout bastards, our president, blah, 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 blah. I don't really have anything to say at the moment. He's in the middle of a tweet storm, I think. I don't want to interrupt him. Fox and Friends is talking about him and about how terribly unfair things are for him or something. And so he's pretty sure America wants him to speak out at the moment. I guess today's thing is he's tweeting at Fox and Friends. The first 90 days of my presidency has exposed the total failure of the last 8 years of foreign policy. So true. So true. So true. I'm not really sure if he's... it's in quotes here. Quote, the first 90 days of my presidency. I guess what happened here is that Fox and Friends, for whatever ridiculous reason, decided to say that the first 90 days of Donald Trump's presidency has exposed the total failure of the last 8 years of foreign policy, largely, I guess, by escalating us to the brink of possible global thermonuclear war over the Korean crisis, which was awesome how we avoided that, I thought, over the last 8 years, but really actually sucked. And we can't wait to get into it. And he turned it into, my presidency, because of course it is his presidency, but he puts everything, I guess, in the first person whenever he can. And after all, it's really time to talk about me. And someone reminded me that that's probably what he was thinking when he was laying about in his bathrobe so many years ago, with his watch on, interestingly enough, recirculating that horrific photo, just in case you felt like keeping your breakfast today, but had forgotten that you had resolved to start dieting, probably around New Year's, but maybe some of you make Easter resolutions for all I know. Okay, we can catch up on the stories of the weekend, possibly a little bit later on. Greg Dworkin will join us. He'll definitely join us. We'll possibly catch up on the stories. I don't even know what I would say dominated the news for the weekend. He was mostly quiet. He was off at Mar-a-Lago. The morning's news is the much anticipated among the Washington press corps, anyway, Easter egg roll. White House Easter egg roll takes place today, though it's Monday, and I guess it's traditionally on Monday that this happens, so no different there. But I did see a picture tweeted allegedly from the White House grounds this morning depicting the lack of any... There's just no takers on this White House egg roll, where there would ordinarily be hundreds of kids and parents in line waiting for their chance to claim a souvenir Easter egg. And I guess, I don't know whether you get to meet the president, but you get to hang around on the White House lawn, and there's just nobody there, which reminded me a great deal of what it looked like at inauguration time. There's stands for reviewing the big parade and waving at the president, and there's just nobody there. Just nobody local has any interest in coming out and viewing or meeting the president. I also did learn this morning, though, that there was an event. Maybe everybody's just tired of Easter events, because if you wanted to meet the president during an Easter event on Easter, it was an easy enough thing to do. You just had to be a Mar-a-Lago member. He had a private Mar-a-Lago Easter event yesterday, which by itself is nothing unusual or special. I'm sure they have private events there all the time, but the president's big public event for Easter, if you want to hang around the president, is, I guess, supposed to be the White House Easter egg roll. And And this is the first president who's also operated a for-profit private club where you could hang out with him earlier. I guess he's the first person to do it above board, I suppose, if you consider what this is above board. Anyway, Greg Dworkin joins us this morning on a fantastic new microphone, as you all remember. Good morning, Greg.
Hi, did I remember to turn it on?
It is on, yes. So we hear you. We're ready to go. Are you rolling any eggs of any kind?
I'm not, but I had this, I thought I'd come on a little early today because I might have to scoot out a little early, but I had this piece here from CNN Politics. White House bounces into spring with 139th annual Easter egg roll. It is kind of interesting to remember that it is a long-standing tradition. 139th is actually a lot.
Yes, and a lot of eggs as well.
But, as you read the article, it's actually not just, Melania Trump is going to host a Easter egg hunt that isn't that cool and it's kind of a fluff piece. Mm-hmm. It's actually a little bit of a story about how they screwed this up too.
Oh, well.
Because you have to order these wooden Easter eggs way in advance. Yes. And the Easter egg manufacturers were pestering the White House. You haven't put your order in. You're not organizing this. They didn't have a tremendous number of volunteers, so they had to put out a call for volunteers needed stat. You need 400 registered volunteers, including locals, in order to do this. And this usually takes some kind of planning if you've ever organized any kind of volunteer service. So it'll be interesting to see how it happens. But, it's just a part for the course, really.
This is about the time when Eastern European and Russian teens and university students begin moving to the United States for summer work anyway. Mm-hmm. So they could perhaps staff the Easter egg roll that way.
Well, there's plenty of people that do it if you're organized and you know how to reach them and so on and so forth.
Well, what else have you got? Because he's not that.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. So It was kind of interesting that this is coming together the way you would normally expect things to happen.
Yeah. So credit, by the way, to Betsy Klein, I believe is the photographer on the No Lines at the Egg Roll tweet. Works for CNN and has a nice shot of the
too.
Yeah. There's a nice shot of the volunteer there alone checking her phone. Is today Monday?
Yeah.
Dang. No kids.
Yeah, I was supposed to do it today. I don't know. Anyway, there are some other interesting stories that hopefully won't get lost. I'm going to mention some of them. We do want to remember that we have this John Ossoff special election in Georgia tomorrow.
Yes, go beat the other guy.
And we hope he wins. I guess, as a political analyst, if I can wear that set of earphones for like 30 seconds, it's probably a good idea to temper expectations. We hope he wins, but we don't know. He'll certainly, at the very least, come into a runoff, and he'll probably finish first of the contenders. The question is, does he hit 50% and therefore doesn't need a runoff?
Well, we all hope so, of course. And I guess, you know what, normally I would say you're right, you temper expectations, but basically, if you temper them or you don't, if you don't win outright tomorrow, Donald Trump will tweet that it's a big failure for Democrats and they said they were going to win. It doesn't matter. So you know what? Don't even temper expectations. Just go vote. Temper, don't temper. Trump will say that you said Ossoff was going to win tomorrow.
Right. I also want to acknowledge the fact that there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in North Korea that seem weird.
Oh?
Well, over the weekend, for example, North Korea set off one of their missiles as a show of force and it blew up.
Well, that's forceful.
Yeah. Is it their incompetence? Is it American sabotage? Is it something that Trump can claim he did it? The background there is that North Korea is doing the things that North Korea does. Rattle their sabers, make a lot of noise, rally their people around them because that's what they do.
Yes.
And the question is, will the inexperienced Bush team take this as the usual things that North Korea does, or take it as a step further and therefore take themselves a step further? In other words, there's an interesting piece in the New York Times today entitled "A Cuban Missile Crisis in Slow Motion in North Korea." And if you remember back to the original Cuban Missile Crisis, the Kennedy administration had to make a decision because they were being given two separate messages, the tough one and the conciliatory one. And they made the decision to pay attention to the conciliatory one, which turned out to be the right move, the right playing move at that time.
That's right.
Because we were awfully close to nuclear war. And the question is, what happens now?
Yes, well, by the way, I just noticed that you had said the inexperienced Bush administration, which was true at the time, but it is the Trump administration now.
Inexperienced Trump administration.
But,
I still have some
stands.
trouble calling Trump president.
Well, you started with inexperienced, and I understand how you just slipped into the Bush administration. They're experienced now, though.
Yeah, they are. The Bush, the father Bush certainly was not inexperienced. Here from the New York Times story, what is playing out, said Robert Litwack of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. And by the way, I'm very glad you listened to what I say so you can correct me. Who tracks this potentially deadly interplay is the Cuban Missile Crisis in slow motion. But the slow motion part appears to be speeding up as President Trump,
that guy, right,
and his aides have made it clear that the United States will no longer tolerate the incremental advances that have moved Mr. Kim so close to his goals. Tillerson, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, has said repeatedly that our policy of strategic patience has ended, hardening the American position as Mr. Kim makes steady progress toward two primary goals: shrinking a nuclear weapon to a size that can fit atop a long-range missile, and developing a hydrogen bomb with up to 1,000 times the power than the Hiroshima-style weapons he's built so far.
And those are pretty good as nuclear weapons go, but...
Well, those are bad things to happen.
Right, that's the problem.
But the question is...
Well, good work,
what happens now? So the article points out, so far Mr. Trump has played his hand, militarily at least, as cautiously as his predecessors. A series of situation room meetings has come to the predictable conclusion that while the United States can be more aggressive, it should stop short of confronting the North so frontally that it risks rekindling the Korean War nearly 64 years after it came to an uneasy armistice.
True.
Meanwhile, the current standoff gets more volatile. So Trump is new to the dynamic, and he volunteered that when he talked to President Xi from China, he said, after listening for 10 minutes, I realized it's not so easy.
Yes. That's all it took, though, so that he's a quick study.
He also was a quick study on healthcare, realizing it's not so easy after about 3 minutes.
Yes.
We've got to give him credit for incredibly fast realizations when it's actually his to do.
Right. Well, lightning fast. At one point, he thought it would take him an hour and a half to learn all there is to know about nuclear missiles. So he's got that down to 10 minutes.
So the question then becomes, what happens if the usual normal North Korean saber rattling is misinterpreted by the Trump administration as something more aggressive than it actually is? And what are the consequences of that? And that's what we worry about.
Yes. I'm concerned. We did make it through the weekend, and that's good. He was mostly distracted. So that was helpful.
This is one of those situations where you really can't afford an error. And one of the situations that reminds us why it's important to have somebody who's qualified and competent in that particular position, which is to say president. Yes.
Well, what else have we got? Is there anything else we can do if we don't have that?
Well, in the meantime, Gallup is looking at what's going on with Trump, and they have a piece today, and the title is, the majority in the U.S. no longer think Trump keeps his promises. It was 62% in February that thought he did. It's now April. That's down to 45%. That's a pretty big drop, 17 points.
Yeah, not a lot of time that it took to get there.
Yeah. Other things that have dropped is a strong, decisive leaders dropped 7 points, is now 52%. Can bring about changes the country needs is down 7 points and is now 46. Is honest and trustworthy was never great at 42. Dropped 6 is now 36. And cares about needs of people like you is down 4 points to 42. Can manage the government effectively is down 3 points to 41. So those numbers, 36 to 42 for most of this stuff here, is about the range he actually polls at. But there are people who still think that he's a strong and decisive leader who keeps his promises and can bring about changes the country needs. I think we need another 2 weeks, and those numbers will drop as well.
Oh.
Gallup does note that the people that have dropped the most are the ones who hated him the most. And that's, important. Women in particular, percentage who think Donald Trump keeps his promise. Women were 65 in early February and are now 40. They've dropped 25 points. Democrats have dropped 21, Independents 16, and Republicans 11. Of course, you'd expect them to be the slowest. And the 55 and olders have dropped 12 points. Even conservatives have dropped 9. So one of the points that we always make is that Trump does have his core group of supporters. And I and many others, unfortunately not the media, think it's a complete waste of time to keep talking to them. Because every time you do that, you're going to find, we haven't changed our mind. They're never going to change their mind. That's why they're core supporters. These are the people that go to the Trump rallies.
Yes.
It's everybody else.
He doesn't have.
It's the moderates. It's the independents. Independents have dropped 16 points on keeping promises. For example, moderates have dropped 16 points. Some of them voted for him. They're the ones he's losing, and they're the ones who really are much more worthwhile to focus on.
If the election were held today, that would be great. We should try that.
We should. We should do it again. Meanwhile, the resistance goes on.
Yes. Big weekend for the resistance as well. I haven't mentioned that yet, and I owe them, of course, the big. By some accounts, and I didn't really check those accounts, but by some accounts, there were more people out yesterday. Was it yesterday? Saturday in tax protests
against his taxes.
Yes,
he hasn't released them.
Right, more people out in the street than during the post-inaugural Women's March. I don't know whether that checks out or whether that's a real figure. I certainly felt like I saw more social media participation on the Women's March day than tax protest day, but maybe that one just felt.
There'll be a science march coming up this month as well. On the pundit roundup, I had a picture of a fellow at one of these tax marches holding up a sign, which is a great sign. It says, "It's not like we're asking to see your birth certificate."
Yeah, that would really, I'm sure, annoy him a great deal. And I don't think we've seen it, by the way. Just wondering. I mean,
I did tweet about it. He said all these tiny, minuscule, puny, it's like he's a supervillain. Your puny efforts will make no difference. So the idea here is he tweeted something along the lines of all these small and meaningless rallies against me were funded by outside sources. It's really time we looked into that. And the tweet was, I don't have it in front of me, but it was something to that effect. And that just means it's getting to him.
That's true. It does. I did enjoy the irony of that tweet. Yes, he wanted there to be someone he said should look into it, not someone with power maybe, should look into who is funding these protests against, who's paying the protesters.
Might know if he actually talked to his law enforcement and intelligence services, but he doesn't. Apparently, when they send him the presidential daily briefing, the famous PDBs, it's basically have to be in pictograph form because he doesn't read.
Yes. 1 page, 9 bullet points.
Yeah, and 3 pictures.
Yeah, I thought the irony of the whole thing was, of course, he wanted to know who was paying the protesters, and they were out there protesting because no one knows who pays him.
Right. So
this doesn't occur to him, though.
In the spirit of the resistance, I do want to cover one piece here from Politico on town halls that the GOP are doing, which I think was interesting.
Some people did dare do them. That's true.
And then turn to a Brian Boitler piece from a few days ago from New Republic called "Republicans Are Holding Themselves Hostage. They're Threatening a Government Shutdown Against Their Own Party." And I thought that would also be worthwhile to remind people about.
Oh, yes. That's a good point.
It is. He always makes a good point. So as far as the town halls go, here are the things, the 4 things that they come to. First of all, the Republican Affordable Health Care Act, ACHA credits, that's the repeal and replace deal, have sharpened their skepticism of the bill. And it's Republicans and independents and local people who are complaining about it. And it says here, across all factions of the divided Republican conference, lawmakers found one common way to generate applause from a hostile crowd: criticize the bill. That does not suggest it's going anywhere anytime soon. Second, the House GOP civil war is getting noticed beyond the Beltway. That is to say, you go to these town halls, and for example, Mike Hoffman from Colorado, who we've mentioned, 1,600 miles from Washington, D.C., a young woman stood up to ask the Colorado Republican whether he was part of the Freedom Caucus, which doesn't post its full membership list, or the Tuesday Group, a 50-member band of moderate Republicans. She also asked whether it was appropriate for lawmakers to join secret societies. And then appeared caught off by the question. Secret societies, whoa. So, that was being part of the Tuesday Group.
Secret society. I don't believe I got to mention its name.
Right, but the point is the constituents in local areas asking about which faction you belong to in the House GOP conference means that the inter-party fighting has gotten so ugly that it's gone way beyond Washington, and people back home are noticing which side you're on, that there are sides.
Yeah.
And which side you're on, and starting to hold you to it. So I thought that was pretty
highly unusual town hall question, and it may be, I don't know what's more unusual, that people are noticing, or I don't know, maybe it's chicken and egg, or that people are noticing because they notice that when they read about it, they don't own up to their memberships, and that strikes people as weird and causes them to call them secret societies, and I guess it's not incorrect. That's maybe
in the case of the Freedom Caucus, it is secret.
Yeah, it is right. Tuesday Group, I guess they would reveal their membership to anyone who would listen.
Like the Trump White House doesn't tell you who's visiting the Obama.
Right. There's an awful lot of secrecy going on, and it strikes people as odd. This is not normal, and they do know it.
It is not normal. As a matter of fact, Kyle Kondik and a couple of other political scientists who I follow and news reporters, myself and others, were tweeting last week about, hey, who's got the most recent, up-to-date, homegrown list of who's in the Freedom Caucus? Wikipedia maintains a page. And we all use that as a basis. But it seems to be a fluctuating group, and nobody has the full count because they don't reveal it. So you had these, people who study this thing on Twitter trading names. This one's up, this one's down, this one said in public he's on it or not on it. That's not normal.
It isn't. It's more work than it's often worth to maintain such a list, but usually because there's not very much interest.
Yeah.
Because people aren't secret.
But there is interest, and there's no name. So, it's a secret society, and they're right to hit them with that.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well done there. I did notice that there was also, who had the town hall over the weekend where they insisted to their constituents, hey, I don't work for you people. Who was that guy? There was a fellow. It was in Oklahoma, I believe. He might be able to get away with it.
You guys, you don't pay my salary.
Yeah, interesting position to take. It didn't do very well with that one. I don't think they liked it a lot.
Well, it didn't do well with a lot of these, but here's point number 3 out of 4.
Okay.
Which I thought was interesting. Republicans have gotten better at handling hostile crowds. Mm-hmm. They were startled by the ferocity of the protest in February. So what they did, for example, they had a raucous town hall leading to viral moments like California Representative Tom McClintock fleeing under heavy guard, and Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton getting dressed down by an attendee who supports Obamacare. This time they were ready. They phoned in local police, imposed security measures, tightened attendance availability, and it worked to an extent. They appeared more comfortable and better prepared to deal with noisy town hall crowds. This isn't winning, this is managing. In other words, they managed the crowd better by vetting it a little better, and at least they were not taken aback and completely surprised that the crowd was hostile, so they were a bit more prepared for it. They still didn't do that well, and the crowds were still hostile.
Yeah.
Okay? It didn't always work. When the New York Republican John Faso, who helped secure the bill's much-maligned Buffalo bribe to force the states of New York to pay more in Medicaid spending, opted for a television studio that could fit only 70 constituents. Mm-hmm. Tiny Troy, Ohio, the local conservative group that hosted GOP Representative Warren Davidson's event, fought to maintain order amid protesters and heckler. But Davidson's crowd was largely supportive of the Freedom Caucus. About two-thirds of the audience remained after Davidson's critics walked out en masse after he criticized Obamacare. But there were other areas, like when Joe Wilson, who famously shouted, "You lie," at President Barack Obama during the address to Congress, was greeted with the same chant from his constituents, and it was Oklahoma Representative Mark Wayne Mullen.
Yes, that's the weird name, guy.
And he said it was bullcrap that taxpayers pay his salary. That's his name, Mark Wayne, Markwayne is his first name.
Not like Bruce Wayne. That's his whole name.
Mark Wayne, and that's one name.
But
he's
weird.
Oklahoma, and I don't know what he was talking about, neither did his constituents. Okay, and then here's the fourth point. Taking on Trump is a winner for Republicans. If they were ever needing a lifeline, challenging the president worked wonders in just about every town hall. Ted Yoho, for example, says he now supports a measure that would compel presidential candidates, including Trump, to release their taxes, and said he was convinced to do so by a liberal activist who urged him to ensure the president isn't participating in any funny business. She changed my opinion, and Yoho got applause for this. He's from Florida, I believe, right?
Yoho, yes.
It's one of several breaks from the Trump administration that were crowd pleasers for the left-leaning attendees.
Wow.
Coffin became the first Republican lawmaker to call for the firing of White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer for ill-considered comparison between Syrian President Bashir Assad and Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler. Spicer later apologized, but Coffin wasn't satisfied. He needs to go. So that's still out there. And a lot of the stuff that Trump has done that offends people is still out there. What happens is people just drop off little by little by little, and then it has a cumulative effect. And remember, we're only about 90 days into his presidential tenure.
Yes, we were reminded of that this morning. Fantastic 90 days, though.
So, expecting his entire support to collapse this fast is a little unrealistic. But he certainly, again, another New York Times story on this I saw this morning, didn't read, but I saw the headline. Essentially, he's been either at Mar-a-Lago or the White House. He hasn't gone out and done anything other than campaign-style rallies. He hasn't gone out to the country and tried to rally people around his program, probably because he doesn't have one.
Right, that's a big problem.
But that also is unusual and not typically how presidents spend the first 100 days.
Yeah, they usually accomplish things, and they do.
But to go out and try to work to get things accomplished, just like he's going around the country trying to rally people around his health care bill, which isn't his and has nothing to do with health care.
Well, maybe that's why he won't do it.
It's a tax bill for the 1%, So it's a weird situation to be in, but you step back and you look and you say, this is really odd.
But he does do fireside chats, and he tweets from the couch watching TV, and I guess everybody's supposed to watch Fox and Friends along with him and tweet back to him like, yeah, high five or whatever.
Right. So last three pieces. This one again from Brian Beutler I mentioned. Republicans are holding themselves hostage, threatening a government shutdown against their own party. and you wonder, I remember a Nixon era political cartoon, maybe it was Herblock, talking about the FBI trying to investigate Nixon when Nixon was running everything. Mm-hmm. And it was a picture of the FBI director, if I recall it correctly, with his finger and hand in the cookie jar. One hand was in the cookie jar. It said cookie jar on it, so you knew it was a cookie jar.
Okay.
Right?
That's helpful.
And the other hand had a gun pointed to his own head and said, "I'm under arrest."
Okay.
And you wonder, exactly what they're doing here.
I don't know.
So, Beutler describes it this way. The comeback strategy Republicans adopted after back-to-back election wipeouts in the 2006 midterms and Obama's victory in 2008. Those were heady days when we were doing well. Drew heavily on two relentless tactics. First, GOP leaders promised to reward their core supporters with unrealistic bounties once they returned to power. And second, they attempted to extort those concessions from unwilling Democrats using procedurally extreme legislative maneuvers. These two tactics seesawed over the course of the Obama era. When the second failed to yield significant victories, Republicans returned to the first. In other words, if they couldn't get what they wanted by shutting down the government, then they'd make unrealistic promises. They won back the House in 2010 on the strength of wildly ambitious agenda, after which they took the debt limit hostage and made good on very little. When they failed to reclaim the Senate in 2012, they shut down the government in a bid to defund Obamacare, and that failed. And then they said real progress would have to wait until they were given unified control of government, and so they got the Senate in 2014, and last year the presidency, and it's perhaps because these tactics didn't backfire that Republicans have decided not to revise them. And so it's less crazy like a fox now than just plain crazy, because what are they going to do? They're going to threaten a government showdown and shutdown to get what they want, except everything's up to them.
Yes.
So in a lengthy interview with CNBC's John Harwood, President Donald Trump's budget director, Mick Mulvaney, laid the groundwork for a near-term government shutdown and an eventual collision with the debt limit by saying, in essence, the administration is prepared to endure them if Congress won't give the administration what it wants.
The director of the OMB.
The catch, of course, is Congress is controlled by Mulvaney's own party.
Yes.
So Mulvaney's proximate goal, according to Politico, is to insist the government funding legislation include language denying federal funds to sanctuary cities. Should Republicans adopt the language, they'll place Trump's government on a glide path to a shutdown and eventually to dealing Trump himself a defeat. Republicans will need Democratic votes to fund the government, and Democrats won't provide them under threat. Either before the government shuts down or after, the measure's going to have to be withdrawn, so he's going to lose. And what's the point, is what he's asking. The difference now, he says, is when the brinkmanship fails, they'll have to run out of excuses for failing to deliver. So what now? It's a great question because, the whole mechanism of government shutdown, you get to talk about that a lot. It's highly important.
Yes.
But what's the goal? In other words, here's a situation where they've mastered the tactics, but they don't have a strategy.
It's like Occupy Congress.
Isn't it?
Except I didn't feel that way about Occupy. But other than that, yes.
Other than that. It's a perfect analogy.
What are their demands?
Somewhere.
Well, I mean, it's certainly it's an analogy to the criticism that other people made.
Yeah,
of it,
that's true. All right, last two pieces, just because I think it's interesting. First is one in the New York Times called "Is American Retail at a Historic Tipping Point?" People are buying so many things over the internet.
Oh.
That you can have a store, let's say like Nike or Apple, where the bricks and mortar store is part of the brand, and so it's all tied together.
Yeah.
But if you just have a general Sears or, some of the Woolworths, Kresge of an earlier era, Gimbals, that just has a little bit of everything, do you really envision the future in going to stores like that? And the thing is, that, as the Times point out, the transformation's hollowing out suburban shopping malls. It's bankrupting longtime brands. Sears comes to mind. And more importantly, leading to staggering job losses. More workers in general merchandise stores have been laid off since October, about 89,000 Americans, more than all the people employed in the United States coal industry. Which President Trump championed during the campaign is a prime example of the workers who have been left behind in the economic recovery. The job losses in retail could have unexpected social and political consequences as huge numbers of low-wage retail employees become economically unhinged, just as manufacturing workers did in recent decades. About 1 out of every 10 Americans works in retail.
Is there any coal in any of these stores?
No, but these aren't white males.
Oh, well.
Actually, they tend to be women.
Problem solved.
And certainly to a large extent women of color. Which is why you're not hearing about it, is my point.
And are not likely to find a response to it from the administration either.
Fitz and Chris are not there to talk to them.
Yeah, why not? We need to reach out and understand them.
Yeah, I would think so.
I might do that.
So I think it's important to keep that in mind because there's going to be a lot of effects there that we're only beginning to realize. Driving is the other industry, whether it's truck drivers or taxi drivers. Obviously, there's been a great deal of disruption to the taxi industry.
Yes, but that's awesome.
But what happens when it hits truck driving?
That is, I don't know, drones? Well, I don't know.
Well, essentially, drive yourself trucks, and then what happens? So the automation pushing job changes. Stores like Amazon pushing jobs changes have way more to do with what's happening on the market than NAFTA and other things that Trump thinks is really sexy to talk about in order to win votes. But if you're actually talking about policy, and if you're actually talking about effects, a lot of this stuff has to be factored in as well. It isn't being done so by their administration because, frankly, they're too incompetent and stupid to do it. So just keep an eye out for those particular effects. And the last piece before I scoot off is from the New York Times Magazine over the weekend. I thought I understood the American right. Trump proved me wrong. It's by Rick Perlstein.
All right.
And it's a long read, but really fascinating. And I'll give you just a snippet of it. Looking back from the perspective of, American historians getting together and deciding what conservatism was. There's some dissenters in there, and Perlstein is talking to the dissenters and saying, looking back from the perspective, we can now see a history that is indeed unsettling, but also unsettlingly familiar. Consider, for example, an essay published in 1926 by Hiram Evans, the imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, in the exceedingly mainstream North American Review. His subject was the decline of Americanism. Evans claimed to speak for an abused white majority, the so-called Nordic race, which, with all of its faults, has given the world almost the whole of modern civilization, quote unquote. Evans, a former dentist, proposed that his was a movement of plain people and acknowledged that this lays upon us open to the charge of being hicks and rubes and drivers of second-hand Fords. I guess that was a pejorative. But over the course of the last generation, he wrote, these good people have found themselves increasingly uncomfortable and deeply distressed, watching a moral breakdown that was destroying a once great nation. First, there was confusion in thought and opinion, a groping and hesitancy about national affairs and private life alike, in sharp contrast to the clear, straightforward purposes of our earlier years. Next, they found the control of much of our industry and commerce taken over by strangers, who stacked the cards of success and prosperity against us. And ultimately, these strangers came to dominate our government. The only thing that would make America great again, as it were, quote, a return of power into the hands of everyday, not highly cultured, not overly intellectualized, but entirely unspoiled and not Americanized average citizens of old stock.
See.
The second plan, the first was during the Reconstruction, scrambles our pre-Trump sense of what right-wing ideology does and does not compromise. Its doctrines, for example, at that time included support for public education. You know why? To weaken Catholic parochial schools.
Oh, well, it's as good a reason as any.
Yeah, the Klan also put the predations of the international banking class at the center of its rhetoric. Remember globalist Gary, the guy who's working in the White House now?
Yes.
Its worldview resembles, in fact, the right-wing politics of contemporary Europe, a tradition there heretofore judged foreign to American politics called Herrenvolk republicanism that reserves social democracy solely for the white majority. By reaching back to the reactionary traditions of the 20s, we might better understand the alliance between the alt-right figures that emerged as a fervent Trump supporter during last year's election and the ascendant far-right nativist political parties in Europe. And none of the history is hidden. In the 1990s, a rich scholarly literature emerged on the 20s Klan and its extraordinary and decidedly national influence. So he just goes on to detail a lot of this stuff. And, so Trump didn't spring out from nowhere, and it's not like, he has no roots in the conservative right wing. Actually, incredibly and unfortunately, there are incredibly deep roots that will go all the way back to the know-nothings and nativism of all sorts. And it's just a good reminder that you can't stamp out hardcore Trump voters. You just have to outvote them. All discussions about, whether or not you try to get a sense of what's going on with them really are not this core. This core is truly deplorable.
Yeah. Oh, good. And I think so too. So that's fair enough. It's interesting because all we hear about is, the general, I wish it was like the good old days kind of mantra from these folks. And I don't know. I guess we've all been running around thinking that they were talking about, the 50s or something like that. And it turns out they're talking about the 20s when they were last pining for the good old days. That's the connection. We wish it was like the good old days when we used to yearn for the good old days. Well, that does make more sense because the good old days weren't what they imagined them to be. But if they're just talking about it's the yearning that makes me sad. Oh, okay.
Right. Anyway, very long piece, but very, very interesting and fascinating one. So I'm going to leave that with you, and that'll be my segment for today.
Okay.
This is Greg Dworkin speaking with David Waldman, my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning.
Yeah.
Who I've known for years and years, and apparently I've been doing the show with you for years and years, and, it's just so comfortable I don't even realize it.
Yes. It's like the good old days.
It is. So take care with that, and we'll see what this week brings. Don't forget, we do have a big special election tomorrow, and people should get excited about it, but temper your expectations in terms of what happens. Take care, and I will talk to you on Wednesday.
All right. Very good. Thanks a lot, Greg, and have a great day. We'll be back with you in 2 days. 2 days' time. Yes, so and at which point I guess we'll have at least partial results from the special election. At least we'll know whether or not there's going to be a runoff. And I guess by way of tempering expectations, I will say only this. The reason this is considered an exciting special election is that there's some possibility of a Democrat winning the seat previously held by Republican Tom Price, who has gone on to become HHS Secretary. And down in Georgia, Republican-held districts tend to be pretty deeply red districts. It's what they build for Republicans down there. And the threat of winning one or even making it into a runoff with a Democratic candidate is what's got everybody excited on the Democratic side and scared on the Republican side. So, I mean, all right, expectations accomplished. The fact that the Republicans worry that they may be in trouble is an accomplishment all by itself. But, the whole idea of Ossoff winning is that it would be extraordinarily interesting because it would be such an unexpected upset. We've come to expect that there might be an unexpected upset because we've seen some polling, but you don't even really have to temper expectations so much. You kind of have to remind yourself, what are we doing here? And the answer is trying to win a deeply Republican Georgia congressional seat with a Democratic candidate. If you are unable to do that, that should not surprise anyone. If you are able to do it, there's your big surprise. So, I mean, I think that puts it in context, but that doesn't necessarily help with the media. That was like too long of a paragraph. We can't write that. All right. Let's see. What have we got in terms of news here? Here's, by the way, a Hill report on the Trump Resorts private Easter egg hunt, which I mentioned. It's no big deal that they actually had it. It's just that no president has ever owned and operated a for-profit private club at the same time as being president before, as far as I know, anyway. And we've gone way back with this research. And I guess, I mean, you don't have to be terribly upset about it in that the question came up in discussing it on Twitter this morning. Was any federal or was any taxpayer money spent on this thing? And if they did it right, then the answer is not directly no. However, it would have been probably the best secured Easter egg hunt, private Easter egg hunt, anywhere to be found. And the president's Trump Organization marketing team never misses the opportunity to remind people of things like that. Bring your kids in a world. Oh, do it in the movie announcer voice. In a world where Easter events are targeted by terrorists around the globe, there's one place you can still bring your toddler and afford him federal Secret Service protection. And I guess that's the Mar-a-Lago Easter egg hunt, because the president will be there because he's a layabout loser and he spends all his weekends there. By the way, fun website put up there, right up there in terms of fun in using the internet, with the old corrupt.af site that Matt Ortega put together. This time put together by the CAP folks. What's the URL? Did I save it? Is Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago.com, or I don't know whether it was .com or .org or something. I saw that one tweeted around over the weekend. I retweeted that one. Let me see if I can scroll down and find that one. They just track with a yes or no answer whether or not he is currently at any given time in Mar-a-Lago, although it was put up when he was in Mar-a-Lago, and I guess I don't know for sure that they updated it. I should take a look. Where is see, I closed out my own Twitter feed here. I wanted to look back. It's probably some even better than Pocket would be looking at what I set aside for myself or what I tweeted about over the weekend. A better reminder than Pocket sometimes is. But maybe I can find the is Trump at Mar-a-Lago thing. So, and this will remind me of all the things that I thought were interesting over the weekend and may have not put in Pocket. That would include, let's see, Tegan Goddard this morning asking in Political Wire, has Trump found God? I didn't actually read the piece, but interesting question. I just wanted to note for the record that if he did find God, God plays golf is the answer to your big question, because there's just nowhere else that you would have found it. This is the, I believe we saw the 18th visit to one of the Trump golf courses in this young administration. The first 90 days yields 18 visits to the golf course, only 17 times with the club in his hand, I guess. The 18th, was the time that he watched TV in the grill room at Trump National for half an hour with two unknown people. All right, let's see. I mentioned also that there was a lot of going back to olden times discussed over the weekend. Peter Baker, a chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, a chief correspondent, apparently the chief correspondent for the White House. Interesting tweet last night, I guess. One of two, but I just found the second one here very interesting. Going back to Rutherford B. Hayes. Why are we going back to Rutherford B. Hayes? The president, of course, tweeted over the weekend that all the protests weren't bothering him because he was terribly awesome. And after all, they shouldn't be protesting him because he did what was virtually impossible for Republicans to do, win the Electoral College. I don't know what he's talking about. Nobody knows what he's talking about. He's a total idiot. And to put a finer point on on that fact, it was Peter Baker who tweeted out, going back to Rutherford B. Hayes. And that's a long time ago, because no one knows even what number president he is unless you're one of those people that memorized that when you were 9 and just never forgot. He's way back there. Going back to Rutherford B. Hayes, we're talking about bearded presidents, for God's sake. Every Republican president but one, Bush 43, won a larger share of the Electoral College than Trump did. Trump is actually literally among the worst performing Republican presidential candidates in terms of Electoral College in history, if Peter Baker is right. And I think Peter Baker is right. Because, I mean, look at the guy. He's got glasses and a suit, works for the New York Times. What else can we say? Also, over the weekend, it was sort of a big issue on Twitter. I don't know how big of an issue it was around the country and around the globe. But among the protests, there were, of course, some counter-protests. And the big counter-protests, and this is, I guess I'll credit them for interesting thinking. The alt-right guys decided they wanted to have a counter-protest that really made a big splash. And I guess they thought that the ultimate place to stage the counter-protest would be Berkeley, California. Even though it was really, well, maybe because it was so likely that protests on this big organized protest day, tax day, the 15th, in Berkeley were less likely to be reflective of the national, what can we say, the national mean, the national norm for who was going to be turning out protesting there. Normally, I think you found average, left-leaning Americans out and marching about the fact that he has not disclosed any of his tax returns, and no one needs any update on that story. But in Berkeley, you would be able to find, and they did find, your more aggressive black bloc anarchist type protesters who I would say, I guess, you really can't and shouldn't classify, certainly not as your typical left-leaning, regular Joe American citizen type guy, or for that matter, Mustafa American citizen type guy or woman, but Mustafa's a man's name, so I blew that one, so you caught me. But yeah, and so they did find exactly that, the anarchist black bloc groups, which, to be perfectly honest, there are a number of people in America who sometimes would like to punch them, and not just alt-right Nazis. However, when you get right down to it, and you gotta find, when you're looking for somebody to actually punch a black bloc anarchist activist, if that's something you're into, your best bet is going to be alt-right Nazis, and they rose to the occasion, including one alleged leader of such a Nazi faction who is apparently about 4'11", if everyone is to be believed. Very diminutive man, but and I guess perhaps that explains why he sought out a woman who was about of equal height with him to punch in the face. But sure enough, a black bloc anarchist type protester, and everyone's marveling at the fact that he punched her in the face on video, and the alt-right seems extraordinarily happy about that. They identified him. I don't really care to add to his fame if that's what he's got going for him. But the internets did a great job in pinning a name on him, and it looks for all the world like they got the right guy. But yeah, the right-wing alt-right weirdos decided that if they showed up in force in Berkeley, they could possibly conquer Berkeley, I guess, for the day. And there would be this symbolic win of having... They were holding their rally sort of under the banner of, banner/excuse of free speech. There needs to be free speech for Nazis and alt-right weirdos. And how could the birthplace of the free speech movement, as they claimed it was, and as sometimes even people who actually were part of it claim was the case, that it began on the campus of the UC Berkeley, on the UC Berkeley campus and in the environs. And there's a long history that goes with it. And to this day, Berkeley, of course, remains the leftist leaningest of the blue, what would you call it? The blue oasis of California. In other words, there are very left-leaning, very progressive Californians who roll their eyes occasionally at what goes on in Berkeley, as I think we all do. And anyway, I guess the alt-right thought it would be fun to punch them in the face, which admittedly is something that a sentiment sometimes shared by people who shouldn't share such things, but they don't usually act on them. And it would be the big symbolic victory of conquering the heart of liberal America, I guess. The rest of us who don't live in Berkeley, and even many of us who probably do live in Berkeley, didn't think much of this. Not only was it horrific to have to see pictures of, but also it was generally who cares? I mean, they'll be gone tomorrow. I wish they weren't here, but they'll be gone tomorrow. It's not like we're living under martial law, under the thumb of the alt-right here in Berkeley, California. Though I guess it was rather remarkable, the level of coordination and the fact that I guess these guys showed up with makeshift body armor and weapons with the idea in mind that they were going to confront people that they felt were... that they felt they could at least hang the label of being the instigators of violence on, even though these guys had showed up with wooden swords and shields and were wearing like motorcycle helmets and cages on their face, ready for combat, such as it was. Anyway, a rather wacko and goofy show all around, and just generally sad, but I think probably most people looked out the window and said, nothing like that going on around here. I don't know what these guys are dancing and celebrating about. Anyway, let's see. Also spotted over the weekend, thought I should point out, Stephen Miller, whose stock is apparently rising inside the White House in the wake of the shunting aside of Steve Bannon. Somebody happened to catch a weird picture of him, as it says here, pacing aggressively and talking on his cell phone at 27th and K Street inside Washington, D.C. Nothing terribly unusual, but certainly nothing illegal about pacing aggressively, but it's weird when guys like that do that stuff. Let's see. Other interesting things that happened over the weekend. Let's see. Just sort of scrolling back to make sure I've got all of this. Yeah, well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. I know I set out looking for something in particular here, and I don't know if I'm ever going to find it, but maybe time to head over to Pocket instead and take a look at the real and more important news stories that we put aside. More important, say, than Donald Trump Jr. sending out a selfie of himself. I guess he didn't take it himself. A picture of himself wearing a green T-shirt that says "Very Fake News," and I guess he thought that was like hilarious. What did he tweet? I'm going to have to buy 5,000 to 10,000 of these to pass around to our buddies in the hashtag MSM. In the meantime, I'll model it for them, and then one of those emoji faces laughing until they cry. Hashtag you're welcome. I don't get it. I mean, I know that they say fake news a lot. I don't understand why wearing a T-shirt that says "Very Fake News" is funny. But I guess, maybe he saw it in Mallard Fillmore, because I can't tell you why Republicans think these things are entertaining in the least. I don't know what to tell you about this. Oh, here's a fun story. Maybe did this make it into Pocket? Seems like the sort of thing I would have put aside, but I don't see it immediately. Pocket's a mess. President Trump is going to the UK. He's going to make, I guess, some sort of a state visit to the UK. And they're in the planning stages of this stuff. And the New York Daily News has this story, among others. The White House is demanding that when the president arrives, that there be a full-fledged parade down their London Mall there. And that he wants to ride in the royal coach with the Queen, the gilded carriage drawn by the white horses and surrounded by the Queen's Guard, whatever they call them, maybe the Queen's Guard, that would be a good name for them. If that's not it, they should look into changing it, but they may, they have names for everything that don't make any sense to Americans, the Highland Cavalier Crumpets. What? No, everyone knows that's the horse guard that follows the Queen. It's probably the Horse Guard is the name of it. I would know these things if I were British, but I'm not. President Trump, the New York Daily News says, wants the royal treatment, and he always does. And I would love to see him get I would like to see him get a royal flush. Do you all know what that is? Did everybody call it this? Did everybody have this experience? If you went to camp as a kid, maybe you experienced the royal flush where I went to camp, and I understand this is white privilege speaking, going away to camp for the summer. An extraordinarily privileged thing to happen, and not all white kids get to go either. I mean, it's a wealth thing, to be sure. You got to have. Have you looked into it? It didn't used to be this expensive. It used to be a Spartan experience. When I was a kid, I'm sure my parents would tell you it was actually pretty incredibly expensive. It's even more expensive now. But anyway, you went to camp. The downside of the privilege was that you got a royal flush every once in a while. That would be, maybe some of you call them swirlies. Pick you up. A couple kids would have to do this to some poor unfortunate soul who was, now we don't do this anymore because there's no bullying allowed, right? They'd turn him upside down, stick his head in the toilet, and flush the toilet, hopefully with nothing in the toilet. It was never that cruel. But despite the fact that there's allegedly clean water in the bowl, no one wants their head in the toilet bowl. That's the royal flush. They don't do that in England, I guess. It would be, I wonder what they would call it. It's the Royale with cheese flush in France. President Trump wants the royal treatment. I should just stick to the text here. The White House has insisted that the president's planned visit to London this fall include a carriage ride with Queen Elizabeth II, Queen Elizabeth II, the second. This is how I guess I'm used to calling it the QE2. But yeah, Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II. This is Corinthians 2. 2 Corinthians. We're walking down the street. Queen Elizabeth II down the mall, and they helpfully tell us it's a strip that leads to Buckingham Palace. This according to the Times of London, which is apparently a reputable paper. But local police said such a visit will be a monster because of security protocols and planned protests. Now, by the way, I've seen a couple of pictures of the coaches, and there are several, and I assume that weather in some cases dictates which one they take. I've seen an open one and an enclosed one. The more ornate of the two is the enclosed one. Though this picture, it shows it's pretty clearly wet out, so maybe that's just purely about rain. But yeah, usually you don't put United States presidents in open vehicles for any length of time. I'm surprised that you would put the Queen there, because I imagine she too is something of a target. But in America, we regard open vehicles for the president as assassination magnets. So I can't imagine that, and horse-drawn at that. I mean, a slow speed, just really not in keeping with normal protocols for American presidents. But apparently this is not without precedent. Other world leaders have gotten this little ride, which is kind of surprising, really. I don't know why the UK doesn't just insist, yeah, this is for royals. The Queen and her family ride in this thing, and really basically nobody else. But it's their carriage. They can do what they want with it. Security sources told the newspaper a carriage, even a closed one, is much more susceptible to an attack than an armored car. If he's in that vehicle, he is incredibly well protected, the car, I guess. And on top of that, he can travel at enormous speed. A security source said of the president's armored car, if he's in a golden coach being dragged at the mall by a couple of horses, the risk factor is dramatically increased. The source added that bulletproof glass could be put on the carriage, but it can't withstand high-powered weapons. It would not be able to put up much resistance in the face of a rocket-propelled grenade or high-powered ammunition. The source added, armor-piercing rounds would make a very bad show of things. President Obama chose to take his armored car to Buckingham Palace when he visited the UK in 2011. Russian President Vladimir Putin rode in an open carriage with Her Majesty during a 2003 visit. So again, it does happen. He found out Vladimir got it. He wants it too. Chinese President Xi Jinping took a carriage ride with the Queen in 2015, but sources told the Times security will be significantly higher when Trump makes his planned visit in October. The Metropolitan Police plan to coordinate with the Secret Service, and any parade would have a high number of armed guards. Of course, I don't think there's that much more to discover in the story, except for the fact that it gives us some context. Other people get to ride in the carriage. So it's not wildly out of keeping that he would ask for it, but it's just the sort of thing. I saw another news report that put it this way, that President Obama spared his hosts the security nightmare of having to put together a parade with him in the carriage. And of course, just another one of those things for the file in terms of, just imagine for a moment what the press would be doing with an Obama demand to ride in the Queen's golden carriage. Somehow it seems more in keeping with Trump's personality, which is the reason everybody hates him. But anyway, I just thought that made for an interesting weekend story. Let's see. What other fun things have we got in store for you today? Some of these things I have to click through just to identify because of the weird way that Pocket stores them. Let's see. Another Easter egg roll story. I know that this seems unimportant and everything, but I just thought this was another interesting touch to it. In addition to nobody showing up for it, the Politico piece here by Nancy Cook entitled Trump's Beyonce-free Easter egg roll, and I'm sure that would please supporters. It's not such a bad thing necessarily to be Beyonce-free, but just by way of contrast, I guess that's what made the Obama Easter egg rolls interesting. A-list celebrities showing up, both just to show their faces there and meet kids, and to be an attraction, and then when in the case of musical acts to perform as well. They note here last year's White House Easter egg roll featured a surprise visit from Beyonce. Athletes from the NBA and Washington Redskins, otherwise known mostly on this program as the Breadsticks, and a performance by actress and singer Idina Menzel, the voice behind that catchy song from the movie Frozen. In case you didn't know, I did not know. This year, though, no slouches, they in the Trump administration. The big act for the Trump administration is the Martin Family Circus, which has nothing to do with the little cartoon in the circle that also isn't particularly funny, but, you know, it's better than Mallard Fillmore. Martin Family Circus. This is a 6-person family band from Nashville that's driving up to D.C. for the annual event in an RV, as real Americans do. Well, that's in itself reason to attend. Are they attending? Last year's crowd was estimated to be about 37,000 people, according to Sean Spicer anyway. They say that only about 21,000 expected on Monday, although the White House has ordered only 18,000 eggs, in line with past years, according to Spicer, who participated in the event as the Easter Bunny in 2008, and so he's the leading expert on this. We heard about the late order date from Wells Wood Turning a little bit last week as well. You know, nothing else new under the sun except for the, one, I note that there's gold eggs among the pastel-colored ones, and I don't know whether they have traditionally had gold eggs or whether that's a Trump thing, you know, him with the color gold. So I see that they're in the mix as well. And I did also see, Bill tweeted last week that there was allegedly a run of these eggs that simply say, on the front they usually say White House, Easter egg roll, and then the date, the year, 2017, presidential seal is on there. And on the reverse, they are traditionally decorated with the signatures of the, I guess of the First Lady and the President. I don't know if they're both on there traditionally, usually, because it's a First Lady hosted event. I'm sure they probably do the same thing. Oh, yes. All right. So very often the eggs on the front, the gold ones have the presidential seal on them, and they look to be a little bit larger than the other ones, of course. But the pastel-colored ones appear to say they have White House on there, and they just have a picture of the White House itself as opposed to the presidential seal, and then this fancy script Easter egg roll. The gold ones, for some reason, have the seal, and they have a picture of a big box of those things hanging out there. Anyway, Bill says, he tweeted over the weekend, I'll have to dig this one up, right, I guess Friday or Thursday, that there is an issue, which is that people collect these eggs, sometimes if they go annually, right? It's a big collector's item to have. But there are people who say, well, I don't really want an egg that's marred with Donald Trump's signature. And so allegedly there is an across the aisle edition out there that lacks the signature so that collectors won't be put off from, you know, collecting their egg for the year. It's an interesting possibility. And I guess maybe goes a small way towards justifying why we spent so much time obsessing over this Easter egg roll. But if not, let's move on. Let's see. Other important news. We just want to note for the record that apparently Alex Jones of InfoWars infamy is in court in a divorce proceeding, I suppose. A custody case, I guess, stemming from a divorce proceeding. And he wants it known, or his lawyers are letting everyone who will listen know, that you can't use his craziness and the content of his stupid show against him. And I hope he won't use the contents of my stupid show against me. He is, after all, a performance artist. He is playing a character, a conspiracy theory, right-wing lunatic character. That's not really Alex Jones. He's just kidding, like Rush Limbaugh. Every time one of these guys gets themselves in trouble or needs to shed the baggage. They just say, well, I'm just playing a character. I'm not real. And we blame Stephen Colbert for making this possible, I think. We might as well. He doesn't care whether I do it or not anyway. So we'll try that one. Let's see. Other fun news. I did mention Greg and I talked about the oddly named Mark Wayne Mullen. That was of course, covered on. Did it make it? I'm sure that it at some point ran on the front page. Hunter wrote that story up just by way of background, and it's always worth doing. Representative Mark Wayne Mullen lives in a different reality than the rest of us. He is essentially Biff from Back to the Future movies, and he's one of the more notable reasons America cannot have nice things, Hunter says. He knows the reason that the government is shut down. The problem is that the four branches of government are not working together. Yes, all four of them. And a quote from Mr. Mullen here, this country isn't ran by just one individual, it's ran by four branches. Wow. But three branches that are in control of this, Mullen said Tuesday. Wow. Why he said it, I have no idea, but he said more. There's more. As long as those three branches control it, then we all have to figure out how to negotiate. Not all of us is going to get 100% of what we want, but we should do what's right. What a win for America that this man is in Congress. By the way, his official portrait appears to have him with no tie on, and something disrespectful if you're black, but if you're white, that's pretty cool. An astute observer might note, Hunter says, that there are not four branches of government. Not unless you include the lizard people, and I think even Biff Mullen here is wise enough not to refer to the lizard people in a public speech. The rest of America is famously governed by three branches of government, the three that any child is generally able to name before their 10th birthday. Biff belongs to one of them. Presumably Mullen is elevating the House and the Senate into each being separate branches of government. That is not quite the way the founders set it up, but if you can reinterpret the Bible into an all-encompassing godly command for poor people to get bent, then inventing a new branch of government is probably simple enough. Biff Mullen has also been getting a bit of guff from back home, which is probably why he seems a bit addled of late. Notable was a telephone town hall in which Mullen earnestly informed callers that the reality they have been living in is an illusion. An illusion, as he helpfully points out. Two callers. This quoted from, I'm going to have to move my window up so I can see where the quote is from. Tulsa, the Tulsa World. Two callers said they had signed up for insurance through the ACA, commonly called Obamacare. Another said coworkers had. When Mullen tried to tell her that insurance enrollment through the online exchanges that went active on October 1st, quote, isn't happening, she said, it absolutely is. I think we have pinpointed the problem here, Hunter says. Mr. Mullen simply does not live in the same dimension as the rest of us. It is not that he is an irrational lunatic. He is simply unaccustomed to the ways of our people with our three branches of government and our constituents signing up for things that in Mr. Mullen's dimension do not exist. He went on to tell another caller that people dying of cancer do not exist either, because our current system lets uninsured patients ride on the backs of magic unicorns to free healthcare land so long as you fill out the proper forms. The same caller, the Tulsa World continues, also mentioned in passing that a friend who died of cancer never went to the doctor because she did not have health insurance. There are a lot of programs out there that if people need medical help, they can get it, Mullen said. There are a lot of hospitals out there that do the work for free. Sure. I suppose the proper pundit thing to do would be to politely rebut each of Mr. Mark Wayne Mullen's assertions and moan a bit about how the parties cannot work together these days. But the more responsible and America-loving thing to do is to point out that Mr. Mark Wayne Mullen is, to use the technical term, a moron, an imbecile, a stupid man who does not tether himself to the same reality as the rest of us, and who seems quite eager to doom us all via a series of economic and governmental neutron bombs, rather than to contemplate a world in which he might have to learn a new fact. When we place morons in any one of the three, Biff, branches of government, we need to presume that they will do moronic things, and with gusto, at that. That's largely true. Let's see. I want to skip back over to the CNN coverage of this, so in case you actually did miss what put him in the headlines in the first place. It was when he was facing scrutiny after a video posted Monday showing him telling constituents at another town hall, the one he showed up to in person, I guess, that they do not pay his salary. You say you pay for me to do this? ? That's what he said. They didn't say ? But they put a question mark on this. That is a declarative statement, but okay. That's bull crap. I pay for myself. This is a very interesting view of public service from Mark Wayne Mullen here. I pay for myself. That's again, Mark Wayne Mullen telling his constituents at a town hall in Jay, Oklahoma. He says this: I paid enough taxes before I got here and continue to through my company. He owns a plumbing company, to pay my own salary. So just to pause here for a second, his assertion is, I pay, well, I don't even remember what, congressional salary is these days. It's 170, in the neighborhood of $175,000. So I guess he figures I paid $175,000 in taxes. That money technically is held in escrow by the United States government and then turned immediately around to me. I pay myself. If I pay more than $175,000 in taxes, I'm paying my own salary. That's not really, how taxation works in general. In most cases, the $175,000 plus in taxes that he pays, and I have my doubts about whether or not he pays that much annually. But he may. But that's used for a variety of things. There are, as you might find out as a member of Congress, a lot of things that the federal government pays for. And I guess if any of that money went elsewhere, and because it's all fungible, it can all be assumed to have gone elsewhere. It's not that they hold your taxes in escrow and then turn it around into things you personally use, but he's pretty certain that that's the case. I paid enough in taxes before I got here and continue to through my company to pay my own salary. Then he says, this is a service. No one here pays me to go. Now, man, that's just crazy and wrong about the taxes and what happens to the money. But also an interesting notion for you to throw out there. That this is a service. Like you're doing a service to the country by agreeing to be the person who does the dirty work of being a member of Congress. And it is dirty work, but there are willing takers. But just an interesting approach to life in general. Like, I'm doing this as a service, so you shouldn't criticize me. I don't know how many people you're going to take to buy into that. No one here pays me to go, he says. Pays you to go where? A constituent objected. This is a service for me, not a career, and I thank God this is not how I make my living, Mullen responded. Oh, please, then don't run, a constituent said, and it's a pretty easy answer when you get right down to it. But how interesting. He considers it a service like I'm not even sure what. Like everybody has to take a turn and it's terrible, but somebody has to do it this time and I'll do it and so lay off me kind of thing. I don't know. Usually when people say I'm doing this as a public service, but then at that point you want to listen to the public and ask them what kind of service they're interested in, but not him. I'm doing a good thing by doing public service. So that's the end of the input. Thank you very much. I'll do it because no one else will. So I'm doing it my way. And if you don't like it, you can lump it, I guess. It's a weird approach to any kind of service, much less public service. Anyway, apparently they asked for some further comment, and spokespeople from Mullen's office said he was referring to federal taxes that he pays for his own privately owned companies, which include a plumbing business and a ranch. The congressman is referencing the federal taxes that he and his businesses have paid to the government over the years prior to his being in office. Like all business owners, Congressman Mullen pays his taxes, which contribute to congressional salaries. Contribute to, yes. and therefore you fail in your explanation. But okay. This is yet another episode, they say, at CNN, in a string of contentious GOP town halls that have taken place while Congress has been on recess. When pressed by constituents, Republican Representative Mike Kaufman called for White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer to resign for saying Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad's actions were worse than Adolf Hitler's. Oh, is this this rings a bell. This must have been the tail end of the article that Greg was reading earlier. But, okay. I just wanted to get that weird bit on record about how he thinks in very strange terms about service on top of the strange approach he takes to taxation. It's really not how it... You know what I'm saying? Doesn't work that way. Okay, let's see. In preparation for this week's further discussion, no doubt we will talk a little bit about this with Joan as well. Government shutdown, which is looming. The Hill has a piece here. Jordan Carney put this together. 5 hurdles to avoiding a government shutdown. Just wanted to sort of put these out there as things to think about that may trip up any effort to keep the government open and running with continuing a continuing resolution and for continuing appropriations. Starts out this way. Congress is scrambling to avoid political landmines as lawmakers face a tight timeline to avoid a government shutdown later this month. Just to remind everybody, within 2 weeks, this will be done. 2 weeks until the April 28th funding deadline. Lawmakers are locked in negotiations, supposedly, over a funding bill that would likely last until the end of September. So they're talking about one more CR that would carry us to the end of fiscal year 2017, which ends, of course, at the end of September. Eager to show they can govern, because remember when Republicans had to show that they could govern? Eager to show that, Republican leaders are pledging they'll meet the deadline and avoid a short-term funding bill, but the talks face last-minute hurdles. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is warning the White House to stay on the sidelines of the talks, pledging that Democrats will oppose any bill that includes poison pill riders. And I guess they're thinking that the Steves of the White House are likely to be the ones inserting those things. Trump's budget chief, Mick Mulvaney, said lawmakers need to include Trump's priorities if they want the president to sign spending bills. So he's, I guess, willing to threaten, though it seems like the White House, Trump himself isn't all that into it. Mulvaney wants to threaten presidential vetoes of continuing resolutions that don't meet his specifications. It says here that there are 5 hurdles that could stand in the way of keeping the government open. I guess these would be the areas where he might make demands, or congressional Republicans might make demands, and congressional Democrats may object. 1, Obamacare payments. The latest threat, of course, by the end of last week, we were hearing that the president was saying he was willing to withhold Obamacare payments to insurance companies in what they call here an 11th hour wrench, throwing an 11th hour wrench into negotiations. The president floated the idea during an interview with the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday, saying what I think should happen and will happen, because he thinks it should, is the Democrats will start calling me and negotiating. The idea being, suppose the federal government just doesn't pay reimbursements to insurance companies who are giving what were supposed to be discounted, subsidized subsidized rates for insurance coverage to lower income customers. And if the federal government just decides it's not going to make good on that obligation, and it's a little more convoluted than that. The administration claims to have a legal reason to claim, a legal underpinning for claiming that the payments are in fact unauthorized or otherwise unconstitutional, and so that they would, it wouldn't be just them withholding it out of spite, that it would be them withholding it out of a fake sense of obligation to a failed and flawed constitutional interpretation, or statutory interpretation perhaps, instead. But either way, the threat is, we'll stop paying the insurers, and the insurers will get mad and blame Democrats because they were nearby when the president said he wasn't going to do something. I guess that's what he thinks is going to happen. So that's one of the areas that might blow up a continuing resolution. The other is sanctuary cities. The White House might insist on an end to the practice of declaring various places sanctuary cities in defiance of his hard line on immigration, and cities that, or I guess if everybody doesn't surrender, he either won't sign the CR or perhaps Republicans won't agree to pass it without instructions that funding for cities that declare themselves sanctuary cities be cut off. I guess this is the biggest change between everything else that came before and the new "this is not normal" administration in terms of the brass tacks of running government is Trump and Trump-aligned Republicans in Congress seem willing now to do all those things that lay people often feel like they would want to threaten if they were president of the United States. They know that an awful lot of federal funding goes to a lot of recipients all over the place, and they would like to know things. They very often will ask questions at town halls like, well, if this city doesn't do what the president wants, why don't we cut off all their welfare or cut off all federal payments to them? One, that's not easy to do. And two, it punishes an awful lot of people who had little to nothing to do with the fight that you're having. And normally Democrats say, that's enough for Democrats to say, yeah, we can't be destroying lay folks' lives over political fights that they're not party to. And Republicans say, of course we can. It's what we live to do. So you're likely to see any federal funding, whether it be for education or libraries or police services or security while the president is in town, be threatened if a city doesn't renounce sanctuary city status or renounce the entire concept of sanctuary cities. You don't know how hardline they're going to get. Another such hurdle, border security, of course, that would be on any list. Republican leaders signaling that they were prepared to leave a key Trump priority, money to pay for a southern border wall, out of the bill in order to avoid a shutdown. My guess is that it comes together better without the supplemental. That would be the supplemental spending for the wall, said Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri. But Mick Mulvaney said during a string of interviews this week, that would be last week, in fact, that the president wants to see additional border security funding included in the bill, and warning the old line, elections have consequences. If they ignore the president's goals completely, then they have to face the fact that the president has to sign spending bills. He told a North Carolina radio station the president has to sign off on this stuff, so the president gets to have his say. His say, yes. His way, different question. In other words, will he veto a bill to keep the government open if it doesn't have border wall funding in it? Big question mark. Another one, for whatever reason, minors' health care and pensions. Rust Belt lawmakers are turning their attention to the end of the month shutdown deadline as part of their latest push to get a permanent fix on the health care and pensions for minors and their families. We're doing everything humanly possible, Senator Joe Manchin told The Hill before lawmakers left for Easter recess. I've been working through Chuck Schumer, and that's the highest priority we have with our caucus. A spokesman for Manchin said that currently only health care was likely to be included in the government funding bill, but the West Virginia senator would fight for the pension provision. It is absolutely ridiculous for us to be held up by our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Manchin said at a press conference earlier this month. It's ridiculous because in a year or two we're going to be in the same boat with the pensions. Asked about the prospects for the government funding bill, Manchin added that lawmakers were pushing for a full fix as we speak, but some Republicans have been loath to include the pension fix in a government funding bill, arguing the minors' pensions was an agreement between a union and minors, but not the federal government. So So I guess some of those pensions must be in trouble at some point, and he would like the federal government to guarantee them. We'll see whether he's able to leverage the president's fixation on helping coal miners into anything. I think he won't be there for you. What else? Defense money. A long-running fight over defense spending is expected to come to a head with the government funding deadline looming. John McCain and Lindsey Graham, two of Congress's most vocal defense hawks, are warning they'll vote against any short-term deal because of its impact on the Pentagon. I will vote against it. I will filibuster against it. I will lay down on the floor of the Senate against it, McCain told reporters. Graham separately added that he would also oppose a continuing resolution because it destroys the Pentagon, unless it's a one-week stopgap to let lawmakers finalize a year-long deal. The Pentagon has warned lawmakers against passing a continuing resolution for funding because it would limit their ability to launch new programs, including new military equipment, and could hamstring their ability to move around war funding. Republicans and the Trump administration want to boost military spending, arguing the Pentagon's capabilities have been undercut after years of budget cuts. But the move likely will run into a wall in the Senate, where Democrats are demanding an equal increase in non-defense spending. Pressed if he would be okay with the Trump administration's supplemental request moving separately from the funding bill, McCain demurred, but added $30 billion for defense is just the beginning of what we need. Okay, that's sure. Here, take $100 billion. Why not? So 5 possible areas where one or another faction of the Republican Party could defect, where Democrats who might be counted on to supply some of the votes to get this thing through might withdraw, and even a few places where the president might threaten to veto and shut the government down if he doesn't get his way, which, of course, always looks good on an adult. All right. Let's see. A few other stories here as we approach or just past the 10:30 mark here. Well, this is there's a lot here. Of course, yes, we've hit on the story of the White House fighting to keep its visitor logs secret. This is an interesting development. And I think, was it Adam Schiff who tweeted this over the weekend? I thought it was an interesting observation that the announcement of their intention of the White House to keep the visitor logs secret comes right on the heels of the White House signing legislation allowing the internet providers to sell your online history and browsing history to everybody else. They've got to keep we're protecting the privacy of people who arrive at the White House to lobby or bribe people or whatever it is that they arrive to do, entertain them for all I know. Various ways you could do something like that, let's say. But that all has to stay private, but your browsing history could and should be for sale. Interesting observation, to say the least. My own thinking about the visitor logs is there's equal probability. I can't decide whether they are trying to hide the people who come to the White House because it's so damning, or whether they're trying to hide the fact that nobody's coming to the White House. Our incurious couch potatoes lout is uninterested in talking to anybody. No one's visiting the White House. There aren't experts. There aren't lobbyists. There aren't issue area experts coming to brief him on anything. He just sits there and watches Fox, and that's as embarrassing as anything. I don't know. I think that could possibly be it. All right, let's see. Other interesting stuff that ought to be rounded up here. Oh, let's see. Shall we end with, I got 2 or 3 pieces here that might make interesting additions to our eclectic mix of the day. This is going to be a nightmare of a link gathering expedition. I got a couple of things that I keep mentioning off the cuff that I know the links exist and they're minor stories. I don't know whether Scott is going to insist on scooping some of these things up. I'll provide everything I can, Scott, but at least we have links to all the major stories that I'm hitting on here, I think. The Washington Post had a piece that I thought was interesting over the weekend as I was recording the Friday show and crossing my fingers that there would be a Monday show, and indeed that there would be a Monday. This piece by John Pomfret, a former Washington Post bureau chief in Beijing, as it turns out, and author of a current book. Let's see, The Beautiful Country in the Middle Kingdom, America and China, 1776 to the present. So really a bit of an America focus on the America and China book, but who can blame him? He's American and so's his audience. This is the piece here in the Washington Post. China is suddenly leaning on North Korea, and it might be thanks to Trump. Here's just hear me out. Here's an alternative vision in all of this. What if President Trump really actually got something to work, and it was North Korea? I mean, it's very difficult to envision this happening when with so much other garbage happening around this crisis. But there is there's a theory out there. There's one of the theories that's just one of the theories that's out there that you deal with a crazy North Korean leader by trying to out-crazy him and hoping that he's not really crazy. Instead, he will see, oh, this guy is pulling my own act on me here, and he's outdoing me, and maybe it just makes more sense for me to back off in some way. Or it could be just that you go and try and impress the Chinese with the fact that he's an out-of-control, crazy goofball, and maybe you better step in and pick up the role of leaning on North Korea because there's no telling what happens with two of these loons out here. John Pomfret's thesis goes like this. Something interesting is happening in China, and perhaps President Trump deserves some credit. For the first time, the Chinese government appears to have laid down a bottom line with North Korea and is threatening Pyongyang with a response of unprecedented ferocity if the government of Kim Jong-un goes ahead with a test of either an intercontinental ballistic missile or a nuclear device. North Korea will celebrate the 105th anniversary of the birth of its founder, Kim Il-sung, on Saturday, and some type of military show of force is expected. And as it turns out, it was a parade, which I think was the traditional show of military force there in North Korea. Lots of focus on what happened there, and including, interestingly, the claim that they would be parading North Korea's first submarine-launched missiles in this parade. And I assume there are a number of kinds of submarine-launched missiles. I assume they were submarine-launched ballistic missiles, as opposed to, there's, the United States, of course, has both, but I guess puts most of its strategic weight behind submarine-launched cruise missiles, which, of course, are atmospheric missiles, not ballistic missiles that, go into the outer reaches of the atmosphere and drop their payloads from up there. Although those would be, I guess, the intercontinental ballistic missiles. I don't know that North Korea claims any intercontinental capability at this point, much less submarine launched. But, one of the fun points, if you will, about submarine launched ballistic missiles is I guess you can creep them up right on shore or right offshore. If you creep them up onshore, that's called grounding them and crashing them and sinking them. I imagine they have difficulty doing their targeting if they've run aground. But anyway, you don't have to have nearly the same kind of range. You can. They've been working on trying to build missiles that can reach the United States west coast from Korea. But if you have a submarine launched missile, of course, you can get halfway or more over the water or under the water and reach your target a lot easier. That's what makes them a tremendous threat. The big question is, does the North Korean regime tell the truth about these things? And is there a way to tell that a missile on a truck, which is, of course, how you would have to parade a submarine-launched missile through Pyongyang's streets, how can you look at it and tell that, yes, that is a missile of the submarine-launched variety versus any other kind, and I think that it's probably possible, as I recall. I don't know. I guess there's got to be some sort of special launch vehicle involved in a submarine. If it's launched from depth, and I guess it's not necessarily the case that the North Koreans have developed the technology to launch ballistic missiles from a submarine at depth versus, well, it's a submarine, so it's nice and stealthy, but it still has to surface to fire. Once you're getting involved in a global thermonuclear war, I guess it's not the worst thing in the world to have to surface to fire your missiles. It's all over at that point. And the survivability of the nuclear submarine force of North Korea in a nuclear warfare environment probably not tops on their list. I mean, you'd like to survive, but I don't think that's the primary objective of the North Korean fleet. Anyway, so I guess they have to, there's some convincing I still need, I guess. If the reports are true that there are now trucks rolling through the streets of Pyongyang with missiles on them at all, and that people are saying they're submarine-launched ones, either North Korean submarines look exactly like trucks, which is a possibility, or, maybe they're not submarine-launched missiles. I don't know. I found that whole little sub-chapter of the weekend's activities in Pyongyang to be interesting, a good line of inquiry. But, again, maybe it's something that people can look at them and say, that's a submarine missile. I can tell from here. Anyway, yes, prior to the weekend, a lot of the speculation of the idea, well, there could be some type of show of military force. People worried that it was going to be a underground nuclear test, which also is, I have to admit, a bit of a show of military force. But none of that happened. There was a rocket launch, but we're still trying to figure out what the hell that thing was and why it went wrong and whether that was part of the show of force or not. Anyway, back to the Washington Post article that attempts to give credit to Trump. In an editorial in the semi-official Global Times on Wednesday, Pyongyang was put on notice that it must rein in its nuclear ambitions or else China's oil shipments to North Korea could be, quote, severely limited. It is extraordinary for China to make this kind of threat. For more than a decade, a part of its strategy to prop up one of its only allies, China refused to allow the UN Security Council to even consider cutting oil shipments to North Korea. Beijing's calculus was that the maintenance of the North Korea regime took precedence over everything. Now, Beijing seems to be reconsidering its position, although I would admit it's reconsidering a position in which it is the one and only player of power here, so I suppose it's not that difficult to envision them going along with that plan. Perhaps even more significantly, on April 5th, the Global Times, which is owned by the People's Daily, the official mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party, laid out what it called China's bottom line on the increasingly tense situation in the Korean Peninsula. First, the editorial said, the safety and stability of China's northeast must be assured. To that end, the editorial continued, no North Korean nuclear fallout can be allowed to contaminate the region. Second, North Korea cannot be allowed to, quote, descend into the kind of turbulence that generates a huge outpouring of refugees. They're anti-refugees up there in China as well. So no wonder they're getting along with Trump. They added, the editorial did, that China will not allow a hostile government in Pyongyang. It concluded by vowing that Beijing will not tolerate a U.S. military push towards the Yalu River. I didn't even know that was in the cards. China has never before listed in such clear, albeit semi-official, terms what it wants for the Korean Peninsula. It's never before hinted that it would oppose the formation of a government hostile to Beijing's interests next door. So how is this related to Trump? In his first meeting with President Barack Obama before taking office, Trump noted that the outgoing president advised him to focus on North Korea. The reason is that in the 5 years since he's been at the helm, Kim has accelerated his father's nuclear and missile program and appears to be rushing to affix a nuclear warhead onto an intercontinental ballistic missile. He's apparently calculating that once he's done this, he'll have ensured the security of his regime. Once in office, Trump issued a series of tweets demanding that China do more to rein in North Korea. Trump administration sources have also leaked information vowing to punish a panoply of Chinese companies that have facilitated North Korea's busting of UN sanctions. The Obama administration only sanctioned one of these firms. Meanwhile, the U.S. military sped up its plans to deploy the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense anti-missile system in South Korea despite China's intense opposition. But that wasn't all. When Secretary of State Rex Tillerson traveled to Asia in March, he warned that the United States would consider a preemptive strike on the North if its nuclear program continued unabated. The policy of strategic patience has ended, Tillerson announced, and everyone was puzzled by that, sort of. Finally, the North Korean bomb was front and center at the summit between Trump and China's President Xi Jinping on April 6th and 7th at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. Fabulous Mar-a-Lago resort. While eating the most delicious piece of beautiful chocolate cake, or it was the most beautiful piece of chocolate cake, with Xi on the evening of April 6th, Trump told the Chinese president that he'd ordered U.S. forces to fire missiles at a Syrian base following the chemical weapons attack on Syrian civilians, apparently by forces loyal to Syrian President al-Assad. These events, culminating with Trump's strike on Syria, appear to have concentrated Chinese minds. The strategy of backing North Korea no matter what is bumping up against the risk of an unpredictable man in the White House. Following the summit on Tuesday, Xi called Trump and declared that China wanted to see the crisis on the Korean Peninsula solved peacefully. Chinese news reports portrayed Xi as attempting to manage two unpredictable actors, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. A day later, the Global Times noted that the attack on Syria made it impossible to dismiss the possibility of a U.S. strike on North Korea. Trump's team apparently is determined to solve the North Korea nuclear problem, the Global Times observed. To show that he's willing to negotiate, Trump stated that if China plays ball in North Korea, the United States will take into account China's interests when it comes to U.S.-China trade. And I guess we'll pause here to note that I am pretty sure I saw the president tweet over the weekend that why would he was responding to criticism that he had backed off of hitting the Chinese as currency manipulators. He says, why would I call them currency manipulators when they're going to cooperate on North Korea? Well, we should wait and see what happens here. In other words, the claim that they're currency manipulators, it's not that he will admit that he was wrong, which is what happened. I mean, basically, American CEOs talked him out of the mistaken notion that they were currently manipulating their currency. And they may have in the past, but Trump lives in the 1980s. So he's probably focusing on that. And when he was convinced that that was no longer the case, he was able to back off, but he's only able to back off because he lays the blame on something else. Well, the only reason I backed off is because they're going to do what I want them to do on North Korea. So I agreed to stop calling them currency manipulators, even though I believe they still are currency manipulators. I will lie to America because I'm getting what I want out of it. And, at least that's the sort of lie I'm used to from a president. So that makes me feel better. I guess, in a way. Back to the article, though. To be sure, other factors are combining to prompt a rethink in Beijing. Indeed, both Global Times editorials spoke about the pressures that Chinese society is exerting on Beijing's policy. It's no exaggeration to say that the Chinese are fed up with Kim. On the web, they refer to him as, Kim Fatman III. They're outspoken there in China. When they travel to North Korea on weekend trips, I didn't even know that they did that. They smirk about how it reminds them of the days when China was poor and backward. A recent post on the WeChat social media site compared North Korea to a rabid dog, implying that someone, perhaps even China, should put it down. Still, the recent pronouncements from Beijing show that Trump's unpredictability can be an asset in dealing with the Chinese, and that his bellicosity can serve a purpose, too. History here can be a guide. In October 2002, then Chinese President Jiang Zemin went to Crawford, Texas to meet with then President George W. Bush. North Korea had recently acknowledged that it was building a nuclear bomb. Bush asked Jiang to use his influence to shut the program down, but Jiang demurred, announcing, Bush wrote in his memoirs that North Korea was, quote, was Bush's problem, not his, unquote. In January 2003, Bush tried again. Again, Jiang didn't bite. Then in February, Bush warned that he was contemplating bombing North Korea. That got China's attention. In August 2003, under pressure from Beijing, North Korea agreed to join China, the United States, South Korea, Japan, and Russia in six-party talks. The six-party talks ultimately collapsed, but Bush's history provides an insight into China's evolving behavior today. The regime in Beijing responds best to clarity from the United States. And as he stumbles toward a China policy, Trump might have hit on one way to deal with Beijing. Of course, it's probably best if he has other ways too. And it's not the greatest reflection on us in the world if the reason the Chinese are more willing to help is because they think the American president is as crazy as the North Korean president. But it's a speculation that's out there, I guess, is the most you can say on this one. All right. Let's see. There's a couple other things and a couple other tabs that I have open here. Let me run through them and see if there's anything else that absolutely necessitates our attention. There's one. That's a good tie-in right there. The Financial Times had a piece that I just thought I'd open up, and just to connect things back to where we're going to end up for the rest of the week, I guess. Paul Manafort, back in the news. Who wrote this piece here? Here we are. Lionel Barber, Gabriel Wildow, and Yuan Yang in Shanghai, and Dmitry Sevastopoulos, in Washington on this Financial Times piece. Former Trump aide, Paul Manafort, advises Chinese tycoon on building contracts. So this is interesting. Among the newfound understanding between the United States and China, understanding that the United States president is crazy and craven and will do almost anything, including swearing off one of his biggest pieces of campaign rhetoric, that China is a currency manipulator, in order to get what he wants out of them. Maybe there could be some other quid pro quo going on here. Manafort, it says here, courted by billionaire Yan Jiehe. I have no idea how we were pronouncing these things. In English, it's spelled out Jiehe. Jiehe? Jiehe? I have no idea. Not like I'd do any better with the Chinese characters. Manafort is courted by this billionaire on access to the $1 trillion U.S. infrastructure boost, which is still just a rumor at this point. But, any $1 trillion rumor is one that billionaires are going to start sniffing at. Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's former campaign chairman who has deep ties to Russia, is offering advice to a Chinese billionaire on how to win construction contracts for the U.S. president's promised $1 trillion infrastructure build-out. Mr. Manafort met Yan Jiehe, the billionaire founder of Pacific Construction Group in Shanghai, last Tuesday. He's doing it right now. Ahead of the meeting, Mr. Yan told the Financial Times that Mr. Manafort, who has represented leaders from the Philippines to Angola to Ukraine, would help him navigate what is expected to eventually be a U.S. infrastructure boom. So Manafort now out of a job and too toxic for anyone in the United States, but it's perfectly fine that billionaire construction folks in China, A, happy to pay him, B, not worried about the toxicity, and C, Manafort not particularly worried about the toxicity of their money. Speaking in a conference room decorated with Chinese classical paintings and overlooking Shanghai's financial district, Mr. Yan pointed to a U.S. map as he outlined his ambition to win infrastructure deals in the world's largest economy. The map that we've hung up here is for Trump's special envoy, Paul. Mr. Yan said, that's how they refer to him. Hey, Paul. How's it going? Mr. Manafort referred an email seeking comment to his spokesman, Jason Maloney, who initially denied that the trip had been for business. Weird. He later said Mr. Manafort had been in China on business, but rejected any suggestions that his client was talking about infrastructure deals. So that'll go over well, too, over in coal country, as the unemployed in the Rust Belt and coal country look forward to shovel-ready projects employing their otherwise unbusied hands and bring home a paycheck in rebuilding America's infrastructure. I wonder how they'll feel about those dollars going instead to Chinese contractors, and I wonder how the Chinese contractors will feel about hiring locals. I suppose that they'd be willing to put up with hiring a certain percentage of their workforce as locals, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were putting up, and especially in remote areas, bringing in workers from elsewhere and having them camp out way out there, out of sight of the rest of America, essentially. I wouldn't be surprised to see some less than widely covered waivers being issued for foreign workers to come in and do some of that work, because you know that these Chinese billionaires, like American billionaires, are pretty sure they can get away with paying people less than they would ordinarily have to pay American laborers to do this work. Anyway, I guess we'll have to wrap up for the day. Plenty of new directions we can go in for the balance of the week. We'll be back tomorrow, of course, and then following that Wednesday with both Joan McCarter, our senior political writer, and Greg Dworkin to bring you up to date on the day's headlines. What about what's coming up next on the after show? We can always depend here on the after show to back cleanup for us, as it were, and make sure that all of the headlines are properly treated in their proper weight here on the Netroots Radio programming morning. What's up for Metaphor Monday, as they like to call it on the show? Nothing says the truth has no alternative than more, or I guess nothing says it more than the New York Times defending the hiring of a climate change denier because millions agree with him. Yes, another of the weekend's big controversies that we unfortunately ignored. Thank God we have the after show to pick up on that one. True, huge story. Saw lots of people talking all about it, and I've missed it. Multiple state and federal judges halt Arkansas's unprecedented plan of 8 executions in 11 days. And DHS Secretary John Kelly says a single DUI could lead to deportation proceedings. Back to the deportation story again. Okay, and for the last half, they'll be reporting that Russia expert and daughter of Nikita Khrushchev, really, says Putin has something on Trump and will use it on him now that Trump is no good to him. And the alarming worldwide alliance of parties on the far right that hasn't been seen since the 1930s. Ah, yes, the big overarching story that I forgot to get back to. Thankfully, they'll hit it on the after show
From
next.
Daily Coast Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thanks again for listening, and do stay tuned, of course, for the after show coming up right after this on Netroots Radio. Just keep it tuned here. All of the aforementioned stories, plus the Connect, Unite, Act, Daily Coast Community Calendar, and more on the after show with Wink and Justice coming up next. I'll be back tomorrow.